I come from a university that doesn't teach journalism, but has 3,000 journalists, editors, and publishers and other managers in its active alumni list at the moment. It is a university that approaches journalism differently from the kind of journalism education we heard about in the earlier panel. And perhaps it's one of the reasons why Reuters, when they established the Institute for the Study of Journalism, decided to be at Oxford in a different way, because what it wanted to do was wrestle with issues behind the operations of journalism, issues behind the practice of journalism, and issues behind the impact of journalism along the way. One of the things that has been of huge discussion, as we all know, for about the past 5 years, has been the business models of journalism and how journalism will make money. And I think this is completely wrong-headed. And I'd like to point out that it's really erroneous to be focusing on revenue, because revenue is really not what business models are about. Business models are about how you generate value for the people that use your product. And what we see today is that the fundamental problem in journalism is that we're not delivering the levels of value that we did in the past to readers or advertisers. And there's reasons that that's occurring. The primary reasons that are occurring is there's so many more places and so many more providers where people can go to get news and information without using the traditional news providers along the way. And this has had an effect also on the advertisers. And we have to be really realistic. The 1980s and 1990s were a wonderful time for anybody to be in journalism. Whether you were an employee enjoying what was happening to your wages at that time, or whether you were an owner of being there. It was the richest time ever in the history of journalism. And literally between about 1975 and the year 2000, the amount of money in journalism in real terms doubled. Okay? Money was flowing in at a huge pace during that period. That is all gone because the money was coming out of advertisers primarily, and what wasn't coming out of advertisers was coming from readers who in many countries in the West are now declining in terms of the amount they read. That's not the case everywhere in the world. If you look at the Asian subcontinent, if you look at Asia, circulations are going up and advertising is going up. But certainly in the West, we have reached a tipping point in that regard. And what this means, this big change that has gone on, is we have to reconsider the business model. And reconsidering the business model means looking at the whole way that we provide news and information, the journalistic conventions that we use behind them, and all of the things that we learned about what journalists and newspapers and broadcasters should do in the 20th century. Because the conditions in which we are offering news and information differ. And we can't expect that we will have a business model that works if everybody in journalism provides the same news and the same information in the same ways. It will not work in a world of multitude places to go. There is no way one can make that formula work. And so for news organizations to sustain themselves and to prosper along the way, they have to make themselves more unique. They have to make themselves more different from everybody else along the way. They have to provide news and information and commentary that is not available in 100 other places, or it just cannot be monetized in any way along the way. They have to provide it in ways that directly meet the needs of the readers or the viewers or the users along the way, not that are provided in ways that journalists want to provide them necessarily. And they have to be provided at times the people want to get them and not on a schedule that we want. And all of these are putting enormous pressures on news organizations, and they're scrambling to use all of the new types of digital media to try to find ways to change this behavior. But they're not doing very well at making themselves unique. They're doing better at getting things to the users when they want to, but not in these other areas. And so what we have to start thinking about is not what we as journalists or news organizations need, but what our public needs along the way. And if we get that right, the money comes, and the money will be able to sustain us. We have a fundamental problem in journalism, however, and that fundamental problem is we really don't like audiences. We never have. It's part of the philosophy of journalism that we don't like audiences along the way. We have this bad conceptualization of audiences. The philosophy basically is very dismissive of the public. And the philosophy is there's an ignorant mass out there that we have to educate. And journalists, I came from a journalism school where over the door, journalists are the schoolmaster of the people. Okay? This is this uneducated mass that we have to educate. We think they're Philistines and we have to lead them to proper culture. We think they're ruffians, that we have to direct them how to think and behave properly and make sure that we preserve social order and social norms along the way. We think they're rabble out there and we have to turn them into proper citizens and make sure that they can participate in the proper ways that they should. This is a very negative and dismissive view of audiences. And it's a view that makes it very difficult to work with digital media and to interact with audiences in any kind of effective way along the way. Because it's not a basis upon which trust and respect move both directions. And you can't have it without that along the way. And what we are seeing in terms of digital media today is that those places that are understanding and working best with the public tend to approach the audience members as equals and sometimes the betters, and sometimes partners in the creation of news along the way. And I want to give you an example of the problem that occurred a year ago. A news organization that I won't name received a comment on an article that had written about astronomy. It came through on their commentary session. And the writer wrote that they had erred in their interpretation of something. They should correct this point along the way. The journalist at the news organization responsible for the comments wrote back, "Thank you very much for your comment, but we're going to have to check this with an expert to see if this is true or not." The writer responded back, "Well, I am Stephen Hawking." Now, the problem wasn't that the news organization wanted to check for accuracy. That's not a problem. It probably wasn't even a problem that the journalist didn't know Stephen Hawking when he wrote the name the first time along the way. What was the problem is the journalist couldn't conceive that somebody in the audience might know something. Okay? And this is the problem when we move into digital and interactive kind of media, that we suddenly have to understand that there are people out there that are often the expert sources we go to for information that are in fact now trying to partner with us in various ways in digital media. So we have to think about our audiences in very different ways. If we're going to have effective business models, we've got to look for new readers, viewers, and users on these news platforms and services. And we have to believe that audiences are not all going to come to single products or use them in single ways. People are going to do whatever they please. And I am always reminded, after 40 years, or well, it's 50 years now, I guess, of a social psychology professor I had who was always fond of saying that even under the most carefully controlled conditions, people will do as they damn well please. You can be in the army, you can be in prison, you can be ever, people are going to do what they want to do along the way. And when we're in a world where digital media empowers people to act in a variety of ways, they're not going to do what we want them to do or to behave in the way that we could make them behave when we were monopoly providers of news and information. So we have to think about them in very different ways and think about how do we serve their needs more than the way we serve our needs along the way. So when we look forward, we have to think about how do we reconceptualize not only our practices and our definitions of news and information along the way, but how do we become a better part of the lives of the people that we're dealing with? How do we think about what they think about is important, and how do we serve those kind of needs? And we have some real problems in that area. And if we look, for instance, at what has happened to our economies across the globe in the past 4 years, and look at the way we practice business and financial journalism, we see there's a big disconnect in how we deal with what is important along the way. Because the oversight of financial institutions and markets is just as important to the daily lives as people as our oversight of government and politics. That we cannot do the kind of boosterous or positivist coverage of these big institutions that are out there without having the kind of critical coverage of them that we bring to politics and government. Because they're just as important in the lives of people and have just as much effect on the lives of people as do the political institutions. The same thing occurs with the way we cover health news and health institutions and many other institutions that are out there that don't get covered with the same kind of emphasis and critical oversight as the way we cover government and politics. And we have to start thinking about, is that the way we want to connect with people? And maybe that's part of our disconnect. The other problem that occurs is many of the things that are really uninteresting to journalists are often the things that impact people's day-to-day lives. And we need to think about, are we emphasizing them properly in the years to come? I mean, news about traffic and transportation problems are critical to people. News about schools, about community organizations, about churches, temples, mosques, all of these things are really salient with the public's day-to-day life. But no journalist likes to cover them. Well, why do they not? Well, they're primarily uninteresting because they don't get attention from other journalists. They don't get their peers patting them on the back for doing a great job in covering those. And advancement in news organizations tends to come through harder news kind of coverage. And so there's problems in just the way we conceptualize the way of what is important in journalism that get along the way. Now, no matter what news organizations do in reconceptualizing content, in reconceptualizing the relationships with their audiences, in trying to build new amounts of revenue along the way, no matter what happens, we will never return to those riches of the late 20th century that were fueled by the advertising model. It's just not going to be there. But that's not necessarily bad. Because if you actually look today, where people are screaming about the positions of journalism today and how bad it is, the amount of money being spent on journalism today is about what it was in the 1970s. And people weren't screaming in the 1970s that you couldn't do journalism. And so it's not a matter of what resources you have, it's a matter of how you use the resources that you have. And what you spend it on and how you do it that becomes important. So we need to be really thinking about ensuring how our content and the ways that we deliver it provide the value to the user. And that ultimately will be what drives us in the future. If we focus on this value and on creating the value and not on money, we have a chance to move into a way where we restore the business balance that is necessary to maintain quality journalism. But it has to be done in elevating the position of audiences in our creation of that value, and it needs to be done trying to find new ways to better serve that audience along the way. It can't be one that thinks about only what do we need for our own selves and for our sustenance along the way, or it will never work. But if we do all of those things right, the business model will fall into place. And the 21st century will still be one in which good journalistic practice takes place and contributes to society. Thank you.